The leather of my study chair creaks as I settle in, my joints protesting nearly as much as the aged material. The doctor gave me 6 months. Cancer, they said, spreading through my bones like wildfire. I suppose after 68 years of cheating death, it finally found a way to catch up with me that I can't outrun or outsmart. My name is Thaddeus Ravencroft, and if you're reading this, you're either a fool or desperate enough to follow in my footsteps. Perhaps both. The silver-loaded Colt on my desk catches the lamplight, its etched runes throwing strange shadows across the mahogany. Beside it sits a leather-bound journal, its pages yellow with age and stained with substances better left undescribed. It belonged to Aldrich Thornhart, my mentor, before a particularly nasty encounter in the Balkans left him as nothing more than a cautionary tale and a handful of scattered ashes. The scars on my hands catch my eye as I reach for my pen, particularly the absence of 2 fingers on my left hand, a reminder of my first solo hunt gone wrong. Each mark on my weathered skin tells a story, from the 3 parallel lines across my forearm, Baltic Black Dog, 1982, to the strange, almost geometric pattern burned into my right shoulder, Quantum Shade, 1995. But I'm not writing this to brag about my scars or drum up sympathy. I'm writing because what I know needs to survive, even if I don't. The bottle of scotch at my elbow is older than most hunters I've met in the past decade. I pour 2 fingers worth, a private joke, given my missing digits, and begin. Let me start by shattering some illusions. Forget everything you've seen in movies or read in those pulp novels that crowd airport bookstores. Silver bullets, sometimes useful, but not nearly as often as you'd think. Wooden stakes, more likely to get you killed than save your life. Holy water, it works, but not for the reasons you've been told. The first thing you need to understand is why traditional weapons often fail. It's not just about material composition or blessed ammunition, it's about the fundamental nature of what we're hunting. Most monsters exist in a state of quantum uncertainty, simultaneously material and immaterial. This is why your perfectly aimed shot might pass right through them one moment and find purchase the next. It's not about luck, it's about understanding the rhythms of reality itself. I learned this lesson the hard way in the summer of '79, when I emptied an entire clip of consecrated rounds into what I thought was a standard, flesh-rendered demon in Milwaukee. The bullets passed through it like it was smoke, and I nearly lost my left arm before realizing it was feeding off the electromagnetic fields from the nearby power plant. Cut the power, and suddenly it was solid as you or me. Well, maybe not you or me, but you get the point. The types of monsters you'll encounter broadly fall into several categories, each more dangerous than the last. But before we delve into classification, you need to understand why these things exist at all. The universe has layers, like an onion, but one that's been left to rot in places. Through these rot holes, things slip in. Things that were never meant to share our reality. Things that view our natural laws as mere suggestions. This brings me to the 3 cardinal rules of monster hunting. Rules that cost countless lives to learn, including my mentors. Rules written in blood and worse substances. First, never hunt during the new moon. This isn't some superstitious nonsense about lunar cycles affecting monster behavior, though that's certainly true for some species. No, this is about the fundamental fabric of reality. During the new moon, the membrane between worlds thins. Things don't behave as they should. Your blessed weapons might turn against you, your protective circles might become invitations, and your prayers might attract exactly what you're trying to ward off. Second, always carry iron, silver, and blessed objects, not because any one of these will definitely work, but because you never know which one you'll need. I've seen hunters die because they assumed they knew what they were tracking. The thing about monsters is that they're constantly evolving, adapting, finding new ways to survive in our reality. What worked last time might get you killed the next. The third rule is perhaps the most important. Never make deals with the creatures. No matter how reasonable they might sound, no matter how dire your situation, no matter what they're offering. Every deal is a trap, every bargain a noose, every promise a poison. I've seen hunters fall for it, thinking they could outsmart beings that have been playing these games since before humans learned to make fire. I remember a hunter named Sarah Chen who thought she could bargain with a memory eater in Boston, 1988. She thought she'd found a loophole in its offer to spare her sister in exchange for just a few small memories. What she didn't understand was that memories are like threads in a tapestry, pull one, and others come unraveled. By the time I found her 3 weeks later, she couldn't remember her own name, but she was still trying to fulfill her end of the bargain. Working alone is often safer than in groups, though this flies in the face of conventional wisdom. The reason is simple. Monsters are attracted to human connections. They feed on bonds, on trust, on love. The stronger the connection between hunting partners, the more tempting the target they become. More than that, having backup can make you sloppy, make you take risks you shouldn't. When you're alone, every decision is life or death. There's a clarity in that. Research and preparation are your best weapons. More hunters die from rushing in unprepared than from actually facing the monsters. You need to understand what you're hunting, its patterns, its weaknesses, its feeding grounds. This means hours in libraries, interviewing witnesses, analyzing patterns. It's not glamorous work, but it's what keeps you alive. I keep a collection of journals dating back to my first hunt in 1975. Every encounter, every detail, every mistake carefully documented. The shelf behind me holds 43 volumes, each one a testament to survival and loss. The margins are filled with corrections, updates, and revisions as I learned more, as the monsters evolved, as the world changed. Before we move on to my first hunt, a story that still haunts my dreams, let me make something absolutely clear. This life will take everything from you, your peace of mind, your relationships, your ability to view the world as a sane and orderly place. It will leave you jumping at shadows and checking your protective wards 3 times before bed. It will make you a stranger to the daylight world of normal people with their normal concerns. But if you're reading this, you've probably already glimpsed behind the veil. You've seen something you can't explain, something that shouldn't exist. You've felt the weight of eyes watching you from impossible angles. You've heard sounds that shouldn't be possible. You're already in this world, whether you want to be or not. The best I can do is help you survive it. The scar tissue where my fingers used to be is aching tonight. It always does when I think about that hunt in 75. Maybe it's psychosomatic, maybe it's something else. In this line of work, you learn that memory and flesh have stranger connections than most people realize. I was 28, fresh from 3 years of training under Aldrich. He'd taught me everything he could, but eventually every hunter has to go solo. You can only learn so much from books and second-hand experience. The real education begins when you're alone in the dark, with nothing but your wits and whatever weapons you were smart enough to bring. The case seemed straightforward enough. 3 disappeared hikers in the forests of northern Maine, near an abandoned lumber mill. The pattern matched typical Wendigo behavior. Winter disappearances, traces of drag marks in the snow, the unsettling silence in the woods that makes even hardened outdoorsmen turn back. I'd studied Wendigo lore extensively under Aldrich's tutelage. I thought I was prepared. I remember pulling up to the Mill Creek Motel in my 72 Chevelle, the trunk loaded with everything I thought I'd need. Silver rounds, blessed iron, purified salt, the usual kit. The motel clerk, Betty, according to her name tag, gave me the kind of look you get used to in small towns when you're obviously not a local. She had the worn-out eyes of someone who'd seen too much, but knew better than to talk about it. "Room 7's open," she'd said, sliding me a key attached to a faded plastic tag. "But mister, don't go up to the old mill after dark. Some places ought to be left alone." I should have paid more attention to the way she wouldn't quite meet my eyes when she said it. The mill itself was a crumbling monument to forgotten industry, all rust-streaked metal and rotting timber. It sat in a natural bowl between 2 hills, the kind of geography that traps shadows even in broad daylight. The air around it was wrong, stagnant, carrying the metallic tang of old blood beneath the expected smells of decay and abandoned machinery. I set up my observation post at dawn, watching the site through high-powered binoculars from the tree line. The first red flag should have been the birds, or rather, the lack of them. Even in winter, you should hear something, but the silence was absolute, broken only by the occasional groan of settling metal from the mill. By noon, I'd mapped out the basic layout. The main processing floor was a cavernous space filled with ancient equipment, catwalks threading through the upper levels like metal spider webs. The administrative wing was a separate structure, connected by a covered walkway that had partially collapsed. The whole place was a death trap of tetanus and rotting floorboards, but that wasn't what worried me. It was the tracks in the thin snow around the building, human footprints that went in but never came out. I waited until 3 hours before sunset before making my move. According to everything I'd learned, Wendigos were most active at night, but their defenses would be weakest during the transition from day to night. I geared up methodically, silver-loaded Remington 870 shotgun, backup pistol with blessed rounds, iron knife, protective amulets, the works. I even had a thermos of blessed water, though I knew it would freeze quickly in the February air. The first sign that I'd catastrophically misread the situation came when I found the bodies, or what was left of them. Wendigos keep their prey alive, storing them like human larders until they're ready to feed. These victims had been not just killed but deliberately arranged, posed in ways that spoke of intelligence and malice. Their flesh hadn't been eaten, it had been borrowed. The smell hit me then, not the expected reek of decay but something sweeter, almost floral. It reminded me of something Aldrich had said during my training. If it smells sweet when it should smell foul, run. But by then it was too late. I heard it before I saw it. A sound like wet leather being stretched and torn. I swung around, shotgun raised, and found myself facing something that wore the skin of its victims like ill-fitting clothes, layers of flesh stitched together with what looked like human hair. Not a Wendigo at all, but a skinwalker, and an ancient one at that. The thing about skinwalkers is that they're not just monsters, they're students of human nature. This one had been watching me all day while I thought I was the observer. It knew exactly how I would approach, what tactics I would use against a Wendigo. It had set the stage perfectly, right down to the positioning of the bodies to draw me into the optimal ambush point. I fired, of course. The silver buckshot tore through its stolen flesh, but that only seemed to amuse it. It moved like oil on water, flowing between shadows faster than human eyes could track. I remember the sound it made, not a roar or a growl, but a kind of chittering laugh that set my teeth on edge. What followed was a desperate game of cat and mouse through the mill's twisted interior. Every time I thought I had a clear shot, it would melt away into the shadows, only to reappear behind me. It was toying with me, herding me deeper into its territory. The real horror wasn't its appearance or even its impossible movements, it was the intelligence in its eyes. It wanted me to know that every step I took was according to its plan. I lost my fingers when I made a desperate grab for my iron knife after running out of shotgun shells. The skinwalker caught my hand and, well, the details aren't important. What matters is what saved me, not weapons or training or quick thinking, but pure dumb luck. In my scramble backward from the creature, I fell through a rotted section of flooring and landed on the mill's ancient machinery. The impact knocked loose a hydraulic line that had somehow retained pressure all these years. The spray of fluid caught the skinwalker full in its stolen face. There's something about old machinery, about tools that have been used to shape the natural world, that carries its own kind of power. The hydraulic fluid wasn't blessed or special in any way, but it was a product of human industry, of our dominion over metal and oil. To a creature that murdered to steal the essence of humanity, it was like acid. I didn't stay to watch what happened next. I crawled out of that mill on bloody hands and knees, the sounds of its rage following me into the gathering dark. By the time I made it back to my car, shock was setting in. I broke every speed limit between Maine and Boston, where Aldrich had a doctor who knew about our kind of work. Later, after I'd healed, I went back with better intelligence and proper backup. The skinwalker was gone, but it had left its mark, not just on my hand, but on my understanding of the world. I learned that day that the worst monsters aren't the ones that simply want to kill you. They're the ones that want you to know how completely they understand you, how easily they can turn your own knowledge and preparation against you. I keep the silver shotgun shells I never got to fire mounted on my study wall. They serve as a reminder. Sometimes the best preparation is understanding how little you truly know. The leather-bound bestiary on my desk has gone through 17 revisions in the past 4 decades. Each update feels more inadequate than the last. Categorizing monsters is like trying to catalog clouds. They shift, merge, and transform even as you're writing them down, but patterns exist if you know where to look. Let's start with the flesh eaters, though I hate using such a simplistic term. These are what most people think of when they imagine monsters, physical creatures with a hunger for human meat. But it's not really about the flesh. A lion eats flesh, a wolf eats flesh. What sets these creatures apart is their need to consume something deeper than mere tissue and bone. Take the Cedar Rapids harvester I tracked in '83. On the surface, it appeared to be picking its victims at random. A school teacher here, a plumber there, a retired librarian. It wasn't until I found its lair that I understood. Each victim had a particular talent. The teacher could recreate any melody after hearing it once. The plumber could visualize entire pipe systems in his head. The librarian had a perfect memory for dates. The creature wasn't eating their bodies, it was consuming their unique abilities. That's what makes flesh eaters so dangerous. They're not mindless predators. They hunt with purpose, selecting victims based on criteria we might not understand until it's too late. They've evolved beyond mere physical sustenance. Some can go years without eating, waiting for just the right prey to come along. Then there are the shadow dwellers. These are perhaps the most numerous, yet paradoxically the hardest to track. They exist in what I call the overlap spaces, areas where reality hasn't quite made up its mind about what it wants to be. You've encountered them, even if you don't realize it. That deep unease you feel in certain stairwells, the inexplicable dread that washes over you in some parking garages, that's them brushing against our world like fingers through a cobweb. Shadow dwellers are drawn to grief like moths to flame. I learned this the hard way after my wife Catherine died in '92. I thought I was losing my mind, seeing movements in mirrors, hearing whispers in empty rooms. It took me 3 months to realize I'd become a beacon for them. Grief creates a kind of tear in reality, and they slip through these tears like water through cracks. The real danger of shadow dwellers isn't what they do to your body, it's what they do to your mind. They feed on the emanations of human consciousness, particularly the darker frequencies. Despair, loneliness, that creeping sensation that nothing is quite real. They don't want to kill you. They want to keep you alive and suffering, a perpetual food source. But it's the mimics that keep me up at night. Give me a flesh eater or a shadow dweller any day over these bastards. Imagine something that can copy not just appearances, but memories, mannerisms, even scents. Something that can study a person for weeks or months, learning every detail until it can replace them so perfectly that even their own mother wouldn't know the difference. I lost a colleague to a mimic in '87, James Morrison, one of the best hunters I'd ever worked with. The thing waited until he was visiting his sister in Seattle, took his form, his memories, everything. It maintained his life for 6 months, went on hunts, filed reports, even called me for advice occasionally. The only reason I discovered the truth was because it was too perfect. The real James had a slight stutter when he was tired. The mimic didn't know about that detail, probably because James had never noticed it himself. By the time I got to Seattle, James's sister was gone too, replaced by another mimic. They're like a virus, spreading through families and social networks. We never found the real James or his sister. Sometimes I still get Christmas cards from them. Then there are the ancient ones. I'm not talking about elder gods or cosmic entities, those are above my pay grade. I mean the things that were here before us, that remember a time when humans weren't the dominant species on Earth. They sleep in deep places, dreaming dreams that leak into our reality like toxic waste. You don't hunt ancient ones. The best you can do is learn to recognize the signs of their stirring and get as far away as possible. They operate on a scale that makes our notions of good and evil look like a child's finger painting. I've only encountered one directly in a cave system under the Carpathian Mountains in '95. I still can't describe what I saw. The human mind isn't equipped to process their geometry. Some of these creatures, many of them, in fact, can't be killed, not won't be killed, can't be killed. They're as fundamental to reality as gravity or light. The best we can do is contain them, bind them, or redirect their attention elsewhere. It's a hard pill to swallow for many hunters, especially the young ones. They come into this life thinking it's about eliminating evil, making the world safer. The truth is, we're more like zookeepers trying to maintain a delicate balance in a preserve full of apex predators. I keep a special section in my bestiary for the ones that defy classification. The one-offs, I call them, like the thing I encountered in a suburban home in Phoenix that existed only in reflections and fed on people's future memories, or the entity in rural Pennsylvania that manifested as a pattern of cracks in bathroom tiles, spreading from house to house like a contagion, driving anyone who saw it to obsessively count things until they starved to death. The world is stranger than anyone knows, and getting stranger by the day. New types of monsters are emerging, evolving, adapting to our modern world. They're learning to hunt through social media, to feed on digital connections, to nest in the electromagnetic fields of our cities. The old ways of hunting them are becoming obsolete, but the new ways, well, we're learning those through brutal trial and error. The categories I've outlined here are imperfect, incomplete. They overlap, intermingle, transform, but they're a starting point, a framework for understanding what you're up against. Remember, knowledge is your best weapon, but it can also be your worst enemy if it makes you overconfident. Every time you think you've got these things figured out, they'll show you just how wrong you are. The silver gleams oddly in the lamplight as I set the bullet down on my desk. Even after all these years, the metal never seems to lose its luster. My workshop takes up most of the basement. The walls are lined with equipment that would look more at home in a medieval armory than a modern workspace. Crucibles for melting silver, molds for casting bullets, racks of herbs drying in the climate-controlled air. But appearances can be deceiving. Between the ancient tomes and blessed relics, you'll find cutting-edge technology adapted for our particular needs. Let's start with the bullets, since that's what everyone asks about first. The process of creating effective ammunition is far more complex than simply melting down silver and pouring it into molds. The silver itself must be pure, but not too pure. I learned that lesson in '81 when a batch of .45 caliber rounds proved too soft and deformed on impact. You need just the right amount of copper alloy, blessed under a waxing moon, and cooled in holy water from at least 3 different faiths. The etching process is even more crucial. Each bullet must be inscribed with specific sigils, not the dramatic pentagrams and crosses you see in movies, but precise geometric patterns that interrupt the quantum field these creatures exist in. I use a modified laser engraver these days, though I kept the old hand tools for backup. The patterns themselves came from a manuscript I found in an abandoned monastery in Romania. The monk who wrote it had gone mad from his encounters with the supernatural, but his calculations were sound. But bullets are just the beginning. Take this seemingly ordinary leather bag on my workbench. The leather comes from a deer that died of natural causes. That's important, as violence taints the material's receptivity to blessing. The stitching is done with thread spun from flax grown in soil from 7 different consecrated grounds. The geometric patterns worked into the surface are precisely aligned with ley lines. It can hold 10 times its visible volume, and anything stored inside is hidden from supernatural senses. Digital equipment is tricky. Most monsters generate electromagnetic fields that play havoc with electronics. Another reason why your phone always seems to die in haunted locations. I've developed some workarounds over the years. Faraday cages help, but the real breakthrough came when I started incorporating crystalline structures into the shielding. Rose quartz seems to work best, though I'm still not entirely sure why. My current EMF detector is generation 6 of a design I've been refining since the 90s. It looks like a standard model, but I've modified it to detect specific frequency ranges that correspond to different types of entities. The display uses an old LCD screen rather than LED. They're more reliable around supernatural activity. The case is lined with a composite of copper mesh and powdered amethyst, sealed with resin mixed with blessed oil. Herbs and natural materials remain crucial despite all our technological advances. My greenhouse contains specimens from around the world, each carefully cultivated for specific purposes. White sage is common knowledge now, thanks to paranormal TV shows. But do you know about the proper way to harvest ghostwort? It only grows in places where violent deaths have occurred, and it must be picked exactly 3 days after a rainfall, preferably just before dawn. The real art lies in combining these elements effectively. A silver bullet might wound a flesh eater, but load it into a cartridge packed with powdered rowan wood and blessed thistle, and suddenly you've got something that can put them down permanently. That's assuming you've properly calibrated the powder load. Too much, and the botanical components incinerate before impact. Too little, and they don't disperse properly. I keep a variety of specialized weapons modified for different scenarios. My favorite is a Remington 870 shotgun with a custom machine chamber that can handle blessed ammunition without fouling. The stock is carved from oak that survived a lightning strike. Natural electricity leaves traces of otherworldly energy in wood. The barrel is lined with a silver-copper alloy of my own design, and the entire thing is wrapped in protective sigils that have to be renewed every full moon. For close encounters, I prefer cold iron, real cold iron, not the modern stuff. It has to be meteoritic in origin, shaped without using electric tools, and quenched in a mixture of holy water and graveyard soil. The knife on my hip right now was forged from a meteorite I tracked down in Siberia in '88. The handle is wrapped in leather from that same naturally deceased deer, and the pommel contains a compartment filled with sacred earth from Jerusalem. But the most important tools aren't weapons at all. Take this compass. It looks antique, and it is, but I've modified it extensively. The needle doesn't point north, it points toward the nearest concentrated source of supernatural energy. The glass is infused with powdered moonstone, and the cardinal points are marked with microscopic sigils in silver ink. It saved my life more times than all my guns combined. Or this pocket watch, inherited from Aldrich. It doesn't tell normal time. Instead, it measures the relative stability of local reality. When the supernatural bleeds through, the hands move counterclockwise. The more unstable things get, the faster they spin. The ticking also changes frequency in response to nearby entities. Different creatures cause different rhythms. You learn to recognize them, like identifying birds by their calls. Protection is just as important as offense. The amulets I wear aren't for show. Each one serves a specific purpose, carefully arranged to create overlapping fields of protection. The silver St. Christopher medal deflects attention from shadow dwellers. The iron ring set with amber helps ground me against psychic attacks. The small pouch of herbs hanging from my belt contains a mixture that masks my emotional emanations, crucial when dealing with empathic predators. What you won't find in my workshop are charms for luck or fortune. Those are fool's errands. Every lucky charm I've ever encountered came with a price, usually one that wasn't apparent until it was too late. We make our own luck in this business through preparation, knowledge, and the willingness to learn from our mistakes. The tools I've described here represent decades of trial and error, successes and failures, victories and losses. Each modification, each improvement, was bought with blood, sometimes mine, sometimes others. They're not meant to make you feel invincible. They're meant to give you a fighting chance, nothing more. Remember, the best tool you have is still your brain. All the blessed bullets and enchanted weapons in the world won't save you if you don't know when to use them, or more importantly, when to run. My hands are shaking as I pour another drink. Some memories don't fade, no matter how much time passes. Some wounds never really heal. Ravenwood Falls, Oregon, 1989. The name still tastes like ash in my mouth. I've tried writing about this particular hunt several times over the years, but I've always ended up burning the pages. Maybe it's time. Maybe someone needs to know. It started with a series of missing persons reports. Nothing unusual for a small logging town in the Pacific Northwest. 3 people in as many months. Local authorities blamed it on the wilderness, maybe a bear or mountain lion. But then came the reports of people who weren't missing, but weren't quite right. A grandmother who couldn't remember her grandchildren's names. A mail carrier who got lost on a route he'd walked for 20 years. A teenager who forgot how to read overnight. Small things at first, like holes being eaten in the fabric of their minds. Magnus Blackthorn was my partner on this one. He'd been hunting for about 5 years at that point, having come to the life after something took his brother in Northern California. Good man, solid. The kind of partner you want watching your back when things go sideways. He had a way with witnesses, could get them to open up about the strange things they'd seen without making them feel crazy. We set up in the Timber Lodge Motel, room 12. Magnus had this habit of laying out his equipment in perfect geometric patterns. He claimed it helped him think. I can still see him arranging his silver knives on the bedspread, measuring the angles with a protractor. Always said he'd rather be overprepared than under. The pattern took shape slowly. Everyone affected had visited the old public library in the week before their symptoms started. Not the main branch downtown, but a small satellite location on the edge of town, housed in a Victorian mansion that had been donated to the city in the 50s. We went in under the guise of historical researchers, which wasn't entirely a lie. The building felt wrong from the moment we stepped inside. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and can't remember why? It was like that, but with everything. The shelves seemed to shift when you weren't looking directly at them. The card catalog contained entries for books that didn't exist, or maybe had never existed, or would exist someday. The head librarian, Mrs. Pendleton, was helpful in a way that set off all my internal alarms. Her smile never quite reached her eyes, and she had a tendency to trail off mid-sentence, as if listening to something we couldn't hear. Magnus noticed she kept referring to events from different decades as if they were happening simultaneously. We came back after hours, of course. That's when we found the nest. The Scotch burns going down, but not enough to wash away the memories. They weren't living in the library, they were living in the memories stored there. Every book, every page, every word ever read within those walls had left an impression, a psychic residue these things fed on. But they wanted more. Books weren't enough anymore. They'd developed a taste for fresh memories, for the vivid richness of immediate human experience. We found their victims in the sub-basement, arranged in neat rows like books on shelves. They weren't dead. I almost wish they had been. They were just empty, eyes open, breathing, hearts beating. But everything that made them who they were had been extracted, consumed, cataloged. The creatures had been feeding on their memories gradually, savoring them like fine wine, keeping their victims alive to preserve the freshness of each recollection. Magnus insisted we could save them. That's what I remember most clearly about that night. His absolute conviction that we could undo what had been done, even when we saw the things that lived in the shadows between the bookshelves, even when we realized how old they were, how deeply they'd rooted themselves in that place. He wouldn't give up hope. They looked like librarians, sort of. If librarians were made of paper-thin layers of translucent tissue, constantly shuffling and reorganizing themselves like pages in a book, they moved in ways that hurt to look at, their forms indexed and cross-referenced with themselves, every motion a citation of some other motion. We weren't ready for them. How could we be? Our weapons were designed to fight physical threats, not whatever these things were. They existed primarily in the realm of information, of memory and meaning. Bullets passed through them like punctuation through a sentence. Magnus figured it out too late. He realized they could be hurt by destroying information. He started burning books, trying to starve them out. But you can't burn memories. They turned on him all at once, and I watched it happen. I watched as they pulled his memories out like threads from a tapestry, unraveling his entire life in moments. The worst part wasn't the screaming. It was when the screaming stopped, replaced by a soft, confused whimper. I saw the moment he forgot my name, then his own, then everything. I got him out, but there wasn't much left to save. The thing wearing Magnus's face now lives in a care facility in Portland. Sometimes I visit, but he never recognizes me. The doctors call it early onset dementia. They don't see how his eyes track things that aren't there, how he sometimes writes in alphabets that have never existed. The library burned down that night. Official report blamed it on faulty wiring. The creatures, I don't know if they died. You can't kill information. It just changes form, gets redistributed. Sometimes I wonder if they're still out there, dispersed through the collective memory of that town like a virus lying dormant. I didn't hunt again for almost a year after that. Spent most of that time trying to drink myself numb, researching ways to restore lost memories. Eventually, I realized the real torture wasn't that Magnus had forgotten everything, it was that I couldn't forget anything. Every hunter has a case that nearly breaks them. This was mine. It taught me that there are worse things than death in this business. Sometimes surviving means carrying wounds that never heal, memories that never fade, guilt that never lessens. The glass is empty again. Some nights, that's all you can do. Keep pouring until the memories blur enough to let you sleep. Dawn is breaking outside my study window. The birds are starting to sing, but not in my yard. They know better. Identifying monster territories is more art than science. You can have all the EMF meters and infrared cameras in the world, but the most reliable warning signs are the ones that tickle the primitive part of your brain, the part that never forgot what it was like to be prey. Let's start with the basics. Vegetation. Plants don't have the cognitive complexity to be fooled by supernatural camouflage. They react to what's actually there, not what something wants them to think is there. In '85, I tracked a mimic through suburban Connecticut by following the pattern of dead lawns. The grass didn't just die, it grew wrong first, twisting in impossible directions, reaching for something that shouldn't have been there. You'll notice it with trees first. They'll grow away from certain areas, their branches bending at unnatural angles to avoid empty spaces that aren't really empty. In heavy monster territories, you'll find what I call widowmakers, perfectly healthy branches that fall for no apparent reason. It's not the wind that breaks them, it's the weight of something unseen perching there. Animals are even more reliable indicators. Every hunter learns to watch for dead birds. They're usually the first casualties when something supernatural moves into an area, but it's the living animals you really need to pay attention to. Dogs barking at empty corners, cats staring intently at blank walls, rats abandoning seemingly perfect habitats. I remember a case in Austin, '93. Local animal control was baffled by a wave of pet escapes all centered around a particular neighborhood. Dogs were chewing through metal chains, cats were clawing through screen windows, even caged birds were finding ways out. All of them were running in the same direction, away from what turned out to be a nascent dimensional tear in a basement rec room. But it's not just about what animals do, it's about what they don't do. Absence is often more telling than presence. No squirrels in a nut-filled park, no pigeons in a city square, no insects buzzing around streetlights at night. Nature abhors a vacuum, but it fears something unnatural even more. Weather patterns are another key indicator, though you have to know what you're looking for. It's not always as dramatic as sudden storms or unseasonable frost. Sometimes it's subtler, like the way fog behaves around occupied territories. Natural fog dissipates with the morning sun. Supernatural fog plays by different rules. It might cling to specific shapes, move against the wind, or form patterns that almost look like writing if you stare too long. In New Mexico, '87, I spent 3 weeks tracking what the locals called a rain thief. The surrounding desert would get storms, but they would always split and curve around one particular mesa, like water flowing around a rock. When we finally found the creature's lair, it was surrounded by perfectly preserved corpses, mummified by the absolute absence of moisture in the air. Recurring nightmares in a population are another red flag, especially if there are shared elements. Humans are psychically permeable when they sleep. Their dreams can pick up echoes of supernatural activity, translating them into symbols their minds can process. Pay attention when multiple people in an area report dreaming about the same things. Empty rooms, locked doors, faces in windows, counting endless sequences of numbers. This is particularly true with children. Their brains haven't yet built up the filters that adults use to screen out supernatural phenomena. They see what's actually there, not what their minds tell them should be there. When multiple children in an area start exhibiting the same unusual behaviors, avoiding certain places, drawing similar strange figures, speaking to invisible friends who share the same name, pay attention. I learned that lesson in Houston, '91. A first grade teacher called me about her students all drawing the same imaginary friend. In art class, a figure with too many angles, standing in corners where the walls didn't quite meet. By the time I got there, 3 kids had gone missing. We found them, eventually, but they were changed. They could see corners that didn't exist, and what they saw there made them scream. The digital age has brought new patterns to watch for. Electronics acting strange is obvious, phones dying, cameras malfunctioning, that sort of thing. But it's the more subtle digital anomalies that worry me. Apps showing impossible locations, text messages arriving in the wrong order, containing fragments of conversations that haven't happened yet. GPS systems insisting you're somewhere you can't possibly be. In 2019, I worked a case in Seattle involving a series of disappearances linked to a rideshare app. The victims' phones all showed them being picked up at normal locations, but the GPS tracks of their rides formed impossible geometries when mapped. Klein bottles rendered in city streets. We never found the driver, but the traffic cameras showed the car folding in on itself at red lights, origami style. Time distortions are another warning sign, though they're tricky to spot if you don't know what to look for. Clocks that run fast or slow are obvious. More subtle are the subjective time anomalies. People experiencing the same moment multiple times, or finding that their memories of a particular time span don't match objective reality. There was a case in Chicago, 2015, where an entire office building was experiencing temporal bleed. Everyone's watches showed the correct time, but security footage revealed people repeatedly living through the same 17 minutes every afternoon, with slight variations each time. The entity responsible had nested in the building's electrical system, feeding off the temporal displacement it created. But the most important patterns are the ones you feel in your gut. That inexplicable urge to avoid certain places, the feeling that something's watching you from just outside your peripheral vision, the sense that a room is somehow bigger on the inside than its external dimensions would allow. These instincts are remnants of when humans were prey animals, and they're still our best early warning system. Learn to trust these feelings, but don't let them control you. Fear is useful, it keeps you alive, but panic will get you killed. The trick is learning to balance the primitive brain that senses these patterns with the rational mind that can analyze and act on them. And remember, patterns can be deceiving. Sometimes a dead lawn is just a dead lawn. Sometimes a nightmare is just a nightmare. The real skill lies in knowing the difference and being honest with yourself about which is which. The phone on my desk hasn't rung in 3 days. That's never a good sign in our business. It means the networks are going dark, circling their wagons around something big. Most people imagine monster hunters as lone wolves, solitary warriors battling the darkness. The reality is more complicated. We're more like an ecosystem competing territories, shifting alliances and endless power struggles, all hidden from the mundane world. The major networks each control their own territories, though these boundaries are fluid and often disputed. The Old World Network, based primarily in Europe, traces its lineage back to the Knights Templar. They're traditionalists, big on ceremony and hereditary succession. Their hunters still have to undergo a formal apprenticeship, complete with ancient rituals and oaths sworn in dead languages. I worked with them briefly in Adao, 82, during what they called a containment operation in Bavaria. Their methods are effective if rigid. They have access to artifacts and lore that go back centuries, but their unwillingness to adapt to modern threats has cost them dearly in recent years. The Pacific Rim Consortium takes a more technological approach. They're based in Singapore, with cells throughout Asia and the western United States. Their hunters are more likely to carry quantum field disruptors than blessed crucifixes. They've pioneered the integration of AI into monster tracking, though after the Jakarta incident in 2018, they've become more cautious about relying too heavily on technology. Then there's the Network of the Americas, which isn't really one network but a loose confederation of regional groups. They're more adaptive, incorporating indigenous knowledge with modern methods. Their strength lies in their diversity, different groups specializing in different types of entities, sharing information through a complex system of favors and obligations. I maintain connections with all of them, but I've never formally aligned myself with any network. That's earned me both respect and suspicion. They'll call when they need information or backup, but I'm never privy to their inner workings. That's fine by me. Politics was never my strong suit. The networks serve a purpose. They provide resources, backup, and most importantly, a framework for passing on knowledge. But they're also breeding grounds for corruption and power plays. Every network has its shadow factions, its hidden agendas. Some are obvious, like the Seventh Circle within the European network, who believe certain monsters can be controlled and used as weapons. Others are more subtle, more insidious. I've seen good hunters go rogue after getting caught in network politics. Take Marcus Chen, one of the best trackers I ever knew. He was Pacific Rim Consortium, Rising Star, until he discovered some of his superiors were using contained entities for personal gain. They were feeding low-level specters people's memories of trauma, then selling the emotional residue to high-end clientele as a kind of supernatural drug. Marcus tried to expose them, found himself branded as unstable, his credibility destroyed. Last I heard, he was hunting solo in Mongolia, taking on jobs too dangerous for anyone else. The networks call him rogue, but sometimes going rogue is the only sane response to an insane situation. That's the thing about monster hunting. The monsters aren't always the most dangerous part. Sometimes it's the politics, the favors owed, the secrets kept. Every network has its own database of supernatural entities, but they rarely share information freely. Knowledge is power, and power is jealously guarded. The government agencies are another factor entirely. Yes, they know about us, about the things we hunt. How could they not? But they maintain a careful distance, preferring to let the networks handle things while maintaining plausible deniability. Occasionally they'll reach out through intermediaries when something big is brewing, but mostly they stay hands-off. Except when they don't. In '96, I was tracking a shapeshifter in Idaho when a black SUV pulled up alongside me at a gas station. The men inside showed credentials I'd never seen before and new details about my recent hunts that I hadn't shared with anyone. They wanted me to divert the shapeshifter toward a specific location. Wouldn't say why. I declined, politely. 3 days later, the shapeshifter disappeared, along with an entire floor of a government research facility. The fake hunters are another problem, one that's gotten worse with the internet. Anyone with a thermal camera and an EMF meter can call themselves a hunter now. Most are harmless ghost chasers, but some are dangerous to themselves and others. They stumble into situations they don't understand, armed with half-truths from paranormal TV shows and online forums. The networks try to keep track of these amateurs, stepping in when necessary to prevent disasters, but we can't catch them all. I keep a file of news reports that don't make sense, accidents, and unexplained deaths that have the hallmarks of amateur hunters getting in over their heads. Information sharing is the real battlefield in our world. Every hunter has to decide how much to share, who to trust, what to keep secret. Share too little, and others might die from lack of crucial information. Share too much, and you risk the wrong people gaining dangerous knowledge. It's a constant balancing act. I've tried to walk a middle path, maintaining enough connections to stay informed while keeping enough distance to remain independent. I share what I learn through carefully chosen channels, using old codes and trusted intermediaries. The notebook on my desk contains contact information for hunters on every continent, those I trust, those I don't, and those I'm not sure about. The politics of monster hunting isn't about election cycles or public opinion. It's about survival of knowledge, of methods, of the delicate balance between the known world and the things that prey on it. Every hunter has to navigate these waters, finding their own path between the network's power structures and the need to do what's right. The phone starts ringing. I recognize the pattern. 3 short, 2 long. European network. Something's happening. Something big enough to make them reach out to an independent like me. Time to see which way the wind is blowing. The laptop on my desk hums quietly, another concession to changing times. Aldrich would probably roll in his grave if he'd left enough remains for a grave. The monsters are evolving, not slowly, over centuries, as they once did, but rapidly, adapting to our technological world with frightening speed. The old ways of hunting them are becoming obsolete, and the new ways, well, we're learning those through trial and error, mostly error. Take electromagnetic fields, for instance. We used to use them as warning signs. Fluctuations in EMF readings meant something supernatural was nearby. Now, the world is saturated with electromagnetic radiation. Cell phones, Wi-Fi networks, Bluetooth devices. They've created a kind of static that some entities have learned to hide in. It's like trying to spot a shark in muddy water. I discovered this the hard way in 2017, tracking what I thought was a standard poltergeist through an office building in Chicago. The readings were all over the place because of the wireless networks, security systems, and hundreds of personal devices. By the time I realized what I was actually dealing with, a data spirit that had evolved to feed on digital communications, it had already infected the building's entire network. That was my first encounter with what I call the digital natives. Entities that were either born from or have adapted to thrive in our connected world. They're different from the old monsters, more abstract, harder to pin down. How do you ward against something that can travel through Wi-Fi? How do you trap an entity that exists primarily as manipulated packets of data? The urban environment itself has created new types of monsters. Cities have their own kind of energy, their own rhythms and flows. The concrete canyons between skyscrapers create wind patterns that some entities use like highways. Subway tunnels form perfect breeding grounds for shadow dwellers. Storm drainage systems have become the new ley lines, channeling supernatural energy in ways our ancestors never imagined. In 2020, I worked a case in Portland involving what the local hunters called a grid walker, something that had learned to use the city's power grid as a nervous system. It could see through security cameras, speak through intercoms, and move through any connected electrical system. Traditional containment methods were useless. We finally had to coordinate with city authorities to create a rolling blackout, herding it into a trap made of electrically neutral materials. Some of the old hunting methods don't just fail against these new threats, they actively make things worse. Blessed silver might repel a traditional shapeshifter, but against one that's learned to exist partially in digital space, the silver creates a feedback loop that can actually make them stronger. I lost a good weapon and nearly lost my arm learning that lesson. The rise of social media has created entirely new feeding grounds. Emotions expressed online might seem less real than those expressed in person, but to certain entities, they're just as nourishing, maybe more so, given the viral nature of online emotional contagion. There's a whole class of digital emotional parasites now, breeding in the comments sections of controversial posts, feeding off the anger and fear and outrage. In 2021, I tracked one through a series of increasingly violent online arguments. It had started as a minor grudge spirit but had grown powerful enough to influence hundreds of people simultaneously, pushing them toward real-world violence. The challenge wasn't just stopping it, it was doing so without creating the kind of viral story that would attract more of its kind. Even the physical monsters have adapted. Mimics used to rely on visual and auditory imitation. Now they can spoof phone calls, fake social media profiles, even manipulate security footage. A mimic once tried to trap me by creating a fake LinkedIn profile complete with a professional history going back 15 years. The attention to detail was impressive, even if it did get my alma mater wrong. Urban legends spread faster than ever, and some entities have learned to use this to their advantage. They seed stories about themselves online, creating their own mythology, strengthening themselves through belief and fear. The more people share the story, the more power they gain. It's like they've weaponized the internet's ability to make things go viral. I remember a case from 2019, a series of disappearances linked to a challenged video that supposedly showed a creature visible only in the negative space between frames. The video itself was harmless. It was the comments section where the real entity lurked, feeding off the viewer's anticipation and fear. By the time we contained it, the video had over 1 million views. The old monsters are changing too, adapting to survive in our modern world. Werewolves have learned to avoid transformation during full moons because of light pollution and satellite surveillance. Vampires use dating apps to find victims, carefully curating their online presence to attract specific blood types. Even ghosts have evolved. Some can now manifest through electronic devices, using cached data and digital footprints to create more convincing imitations of the deceased. But perhaps the most disturbing trend is the emergence of hybrid threats, entities that combine aspects of traditional supernatural creatures with modern technological capabilities. Imagine a skinwalker that can not only steal your physical form but also your entire digital identity, or a memory eater that can access cloud storage, consuming not just your personal memories but all your backed up photos and videos as well. In 2023, I encountered something in Seattle that defied all traditional classification. It existed simultaneously as a physical entity, a computer virus, and a social media trend. It could affect reality both through direct physical interaction and by manipulating digital systems. We still don't have a proper name for it. The closest description might be reality virus, but even that doesn't capture its true nature. Our methods have had to evolve just as quickly. Modern hunters need to be as comfortable with coding and network security as they are with blessed weapons and protective circles. We've had to develop new types of wards that work in digital space, new ways of tracking entities through both physical and virtual environments. The old knowledge is still valuable. The fundamental principles of how supernatural entities interact with our reality haven't changed. But we've had to learn to apply these principles in new ways. A circle of salt might protect you from a traditional spirit, but against a digital entity, you need firewalls reinforced with the same protective symbolism that we once drew in chalk and blood. The screen of my laptop flickers briefly, could be normal electronic behavior, could be something reading what I'm writing right now. That's the problem with modern monster hunting. You can never be quite sure where the dangers are coming from anymore. The sun is setting now. My study grows darker, but I don't turn on the lights. Some truths are easier to write in the shadows. There are things we don't tell rookie hunters, information that's too dangerous or too demoralizing for those just starting out. But if you're reading this, you deserve to know. Just remember, some knowledge can't be unknown once it's learned. Let's start with the uncomfortable truth about familial targeting. We tell people that monsters sometimes fixate on specific families, but we don't tell them why. It's not random, and it's not just about opportunity. Some bloodlines carry what I call resonant frequencies, genetic markers that make them more visible to supernatural entities. I first discovered this in '84, researching a pattern of hauntings that had followed a particular family for 6 generations. Every third child born to the bloodline was plagued by spiritual activity. When I dug deeper, I found similar patterns in other families, each with their own specific timing and type of supernatural attention. The truth is, these families are different on a quantum level. Their DNA vibrates at frequencies that pierce the veil between worlds. Some theorize that these bloodlines are the result of ancient interbreeding with supernatural entities. Others believe they're evolutionary adaptations, humans developing early warning systems against predators we can't consciously perceive. The Thompson case in '92 opened my eyes to this. 3 generations living in different states, all experiencing the same type of entity contact on their 33rd birthday. The entities weren't following them, they were being drawn to the family's genetic signature like moths to a flame. Then there's the truth about holy water. Everyone knows it works against certain entities, but nobody asks why. It's not about faith, not really. The blessing itself is just a focusing ritual. What matters is the water's memory, its ability to hold patterns of intent. Holy water works because humans believe it works, have believed it works for thousands of years. We've essentially programmed reality through sustained mass belief. This is why holy water from any faith tradition can be effective, but only against entities that exist within that faith's paradigm. It's also why some of the most powerful holy water comes from places of mixed faith. The combined belief systems create more complex and resilient patterns. The full moon superstition is another half-truth we let persist. Yes, supernatural activity spikes during full moons, but not for the reasons most hunters think. The full moon doesn't empower the monsters, it empowers us. Humans are slightly more psychic, more aware of the supernatural world during full moons. We notice more, sense more, remember more. This increased awareness makes us more dangerous to supernatural entities, so they become more aggressive, more likely to strike first. It's not the moon affecting them, it's them reacting to our enhanced state. The new moon, conversely, is when our psychic abilities are at their lowest ebb, making us easy prey. I learned this from an entity I encountered in the Australian outback in '88. It was ancient, more intelligent than most, and willing to talk. It explained how humans flicker in and out of supernatural perception like stars, brightest during the full moon, nearly invisible during the new moon. The conversation cost me 3 months of memories, but the knowledge was worth it. Many famous urban legends are actually survival stories, warnings passed down through generations, their details altered to make them more memorable. The Hook Man isn't just a cautionary tale about teenagers in parked cars. It's a description of a specific type of entity that manifests through metal implements. Bloody Mary isn't a ghost story, it's an early warning system for detecting mirror-dwelling mimics. These stories persist because they contain crucial information about supernatural behaviors and weaknesses, encoded in a form that humans are likely to remember and share. The entities themselves often try to discredit or mock these stories, turning them into jokes or entertainment to dilute their protective value. The clustering of supernatural activity in certain locations is another phenomenon we've misunderstood. We call them thin spots or weak points, but that's not accurate. These locations aren't weak. They're more real than their surroundings. They're places where reality has been reinforced through repeated significant events, creating a kind of spiritual scar tissue that attracts supernatural attention. The old asylum outside Baltimore taught me this in '95. Everyone assumed it attracted entities because of the suffering that had occurred there, but when I analyzed the energy patterns, I found something different. The asylum was a supernatural magnet because it had been a place of intense focused attention, hundreds of minds over many years, all concentrated on understanding the nature of consciousness and reality. The pain was incidental. The sustained attention was what had changed the fabric of that place. This understanding revolutionized how we think about supernatural hotspots. They're not wounds in reality, they're calluses, places where the membrane between worlds has been strengthened through repeated stress, becoming more conductive to supernatural energy in the process. Some locations attract multiple types of entities because they sit at the intersection of different reality frequencies. Think of reality like radio waves. Different entities operate on different frequencies, and some locations can pick up multiple channels simultaneously. This is why you might find a traditional haunting sharing space with a more exotic manifestation. I encountered this phenomenon most dramatically in New Orleans in 2001. A single city block hosted a traditional ghost, a memory eater, and a quantum entity that existed in four-dimensional space. They weren't competing for territory, they were occupying the same space on different frequencies, like radio stations broadcasting at different wavelengths. The most dangerous truth, the one that keeps old hunters like me up at night, is that we're not really fighting a war against supernatural entities. We're engaged in a kind of ecological management. These things are part of reality's immune system, maintaining balances we barely understand. Sometimes they overpopulate or become too aggressive, and that's when we step in. But trying to eliminate them entirely would be like trying to eliminate bacteria, impossible and ultimately self-destructive. This is why some of the most powerful entities can't be killed. They're load-bearing elements in reality's architecture. The best we can do is contain them, redirect them, maintain the balance. Some hunters go mad when they realize this, that our fight isn't about good versus evil, but about maintaining a sustainable equilibrium between different orders of reality. A shadow moves in the corner of my study, not a supernatural entity, just normal darkness, probably. In this business, certainty is a luxury none of us can afford. The cancer's getting worse. I can feel it in my bones, spreading like dark ivy through my marrow. The irony doesn't escape me. After all the supernatural horrors I've survived, it's something perfectly natural that's killing me. If you've read this far, you're either serious about becoming a hunter or you're already one. Either way, these final pages might be the most important. They're certainly the most expensive bought with 43 years of blood, pain, and lost friends. My biggest regret, not what you might expect. It's not the hunters I couldn't save or the monsters I failed to stop. No, my biggest regret is how many times I chose the hunt over human connections. I told myself I was protecting them by staying away. Maybe I was, but I've come to believe that isolation is just as dangerous as any monster. Aldrich tried to warn me about this. The job will eat you alive, he said, if you let it become your whole world. I didn't understand then. I thought his warning was about maintaining cover, keeping a low profile. Now I know he meant something deeper. We hunt monsters by recognizing patterns, but without connections to normal life, we start seeing patterns everywhere. Paranoia becomes your default state. I've seen it happen to too many hunters. They become so focused on the supernatural that they lose touch with the human. Every shadow becomes a potential threat. Every coincidence becomes a sign. Every relationship becomes a potential weakness for monsters to exploit. Eventually, they become something almost as inhuman as what they hunt. That's why my first piece of advice is this: maintain your connections to the normal world. Keep at least one foot in the daylight. Have friends who don't know what you do. Pursue hobbies that have nothing to do with hunting. Read books about ordinary things. Eat in restaurants where nobody's been mysteriously disappeared. Dance badly at weddings. Fall in love even though it terrifies you. Yes, these connections make you vulnerable. Yes, they can be used against you, but without them, you'll lose your compass for what's worth protecting. Second piece of advice: always have an exit strategy, not just from hunts, from the life itself. Have a plan for getting out. Keep a go bag with cash, clean ID, and everything you need to start a new life. Not because you'll use it, but because knowing it's there will help you make better decisions. Desperation makes hunters sloppy. Knowing you have a choice, even if you never take it, keeps you sharp. My own exit strategy involved a small olive farm in Greece. I never used it, but knowing it was there helped me sleep at night. The deed's still in my desk drawer, along with a passport under a name I've never used. Maybe I should have taken that exit when I had the chance, but then again, maybe my replacement would have missed something crucial and more people would have died. Third, learn to recognize when a hunt is beyond you. This isn't about cowardice, it's about survival and strategic thinking. Some entities are too powerful, too ancient, or too deeply entrenched to be taken down by one hunter or even a team. Learning to walk away is just as important as learning to fight. In '98, I tracked a particularly nasty spirit to a small town in Montana. It had killed 3 people and was growing stronger. I had the tools, the knowledge, and a solid plan to destroy it, but something felt wrong about the setup. I spent 3 days observing and finally realized what I was actually seeing. The spirit was just a puppet, a tendril of something much larger and older that lived deep under the mountain. If I had tried to destroy the spirit, I would have attracted the attention of something I couldn't possibly handle. Sometimes victory looks like walking away and calling in bigger guns. Sometimes it looks like containment rather than elimination. Sometimes it looks like carefully documented failure that might help the next hunter succeed. Fourth piece of advice: question everything, especially your own assumptions. The supernatural world operates on rules, but they're not always the rules we think they are. What worked yesterday might get you killed tomorrow. What failed spectacularly in one situation might be exactly what you need in another. I once spent weeks preparing to take down what I thought was a standard poltergeist, only to discover at the last minute that it was actually a time echo, a moment of trauma so intense it had broken free of normal temporal flow. All my carefully prepared ghost hunting equipment would have been useless. If I hadn't double-checked my assumptions, I wouldn't be writing this now. Fifth, keep records, but be careful how you keep them. Information wants to be found, and some of the things we hunt are drawn to knowledge about themselves. I've seen entire libraries of hunting lore destroyed because the information itself attracted supernatural attention. That's why I write in codes, split my records between multiple locations, and never keep anything crucial in digital form. But here's the most important advice I can give you. Know why you're doing this. Really know deep in your gut. Because there will come moments, dark moments, bleeding moments, alone moments, when that knowledge will be the only thing keeping you going. If you're in this for revenge, get out now. Revenge is like alcohol. It might dull the pain temporarily, but it'll poison you in the end. If you're in it for the thrill, get out even faster. Adrenaline junkies don't last long in this business. The only sustainable reason to be a hunter is because you understand that if you don't do this job, people will die. Not abstract people, not theoretical victims, but real humans with names and faces and families. Do it because you can help, because you have the knowledge and the ability, and because not doing it would make you less than who you are. The light's almost gone now. Something's moving in the shadows outside my study window. I've been feeling it building for months, a darkness deeper than anything I've encountered in my long career. Something's coming, something big. The patterns are there if you know how to read them. Increased activity across all entity types. Supernatural territories shifting and overlapping in ways they never have before. Old wards failing. New types of manifestations appearing almost weekly. It's like the background hum of reality itself is changing frequency. I've sent warnings to all the networks, but bureaucracy moves slowly and we might not have much time. So I'm leaving this record, hoping it finds its way to the right hands. To your hands if you're reading this. The wind's picking up outside. The protective sigils on my walls are starting to glow just faintly. Whatever's coming, it's close now. I can feel it in my bones, stronger than the cancer, darker than the gathering night. I reach for my gun. One last hunt, maybe. One last chance to make a difference. If you're reading this, remember everything I've told you. Remember that knowledge is power, but it's also a target. Remember that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being terrified and doing what needs to be done anyway. Remember that every hunter who came before you died to give you the knowledge you have now. Use it wisely. Use it well. The shadows are moving in ways shadows shouldn't. My hands are steady as I load the gun. Funny, the cancer's pain is gone now. One last dance with the dark. One last chance to keep the balance. And if something happens to me tonight, remember this above all else. The darkness isn't the enemy is losing hope. As long as there are hunters willing to stand against the night, humanity has a chance. Make it count. The door is shaking now. Time to go to work.